What's the name? What's the name? What's the name? What's the name?
We've justified our sin, and we're gonna take you on a ride till we find answers within.
Hello, thank you to the guest critics, Laura, Marika, Michael, and the Studio A group for being here today. How to Make an Anarchist Collective presents a speculative guide for reimagining the vertical neighbourhood through anarchy in architectural design. At face value, the discipline of architecture appears entirely at odds with the idea of anarchy. The brochure for Studio A tells us that architecture is all about structure, hierarchy, rules, and rigour. By contrast, anarchy seeks to dismantle structures, whether social, cultural, or political, and challenge disciplinary regulations and the status quo. However, it is precisely this contradiction between architecture and anarchy that the collective seeks to explore by showing what architecture can do when it follows a different set of rules. To this end, the project does not seek to present a single result or meta-narrative about anarchy in architecture. Rather, it defines success in terms of the realization of a series of micro-propositions about architectural design that subvert the conventional structure and occupation of the vertical neighbourhood. The 7 steps to develop anarchist collective occur across 3 core phases: planning, construction, and occupation. These encompass the initial ideation behind the neighbourhood through to its structural realization and eventual habitation. However, this is all we'll say for now, so let the anarchy take over.
At the heart of the anarchist collective is a manifesto that guides the group behaviours and attitudes towards structural elements. The manifesto developed from the initial precedent of House 6, whereby the clients wrote a scathing response of their experience working with Eisenman and the final result. They were unhappy with the build, including structural elements that meant that they had to sleep in 2 separate single beds, something which they were not accustomed to. They wrote an account of their experience known as the client's response. From this initial client's response, we then began to think about how could something like that apply to an entire neighborhood. We wanted to break down what architecture is from its fundamental elements and reimagine what those elements are. As the manifesto was central to the development of this neighborhood, we wanted to keep it within the center of the structure itself. This structure became known as the Manifesto Cave. It would act as the intellectual hive that would attract other key thinkers. Within the cave, there are several references to the original precedent of House 6, such as Eisenman stairs and dysfunctional doors. We then had to ask ourselves, who would occupy this manifesto cave? Gordon Matta Clark became known for his involvement in the collaborative exhibition in 1974 known as Anarchitecture, whereby he performed anarchy on the original function of the building to create new environments. Both Matta Clark and Eisenman were concerned with subverting structural elements to stage a critique of conventional architecture, housing, and domesticity. Originally trained as an architect at Cornell University, he became best known for his site-specific building cuts. We felt that this would make him an ideal visionary behind our collective. Matta Clark was also a prolific street artist and tagger, so to develop his occupancy within the Manifesto Cave, we developed this within the space itself.
The Anarchists Collective successfully navigates the paradox between architecture and anarchy with the subversion of structure in architectural design. Buildings are cut, split, punctured, and rearranged, allowing for unconventional forms of living based on spatial permeability and cohabitation. Thank you for your attention.
I'm making
Hi, my name is Kane James. I'm from Wakafuni community. I am a bungee man. This is my name is Blake Cook. I'm from Wakafuni community. And we're at the learning center at the Food Kangaroo barbecue. Yeah, with a bit of painting. Yeah, painting.
As you guys paint, have you got enough paint?
In my head. Yeah. Far away from home, imagination roams. Everybody's wrong. Rewrote the song. Thoughts become action. Tell me what's happening. Wish your mind wrapped in, wrapped around, wrapped around. Wish your mind wrapped in, wrapped around. Psyche sabotage. Your Nikes need a job. Portraits in the fog. Filter out the smog. Information.
His steady pound of devilish footsteps echoed into my ears as he climbed down a flight of stairs. On my descent, I found myself in a surreal land. It seemed like a town that was painted in shadows. I was trapped in between soaring towers that reached the sky and the deeper life in the abyss. It seemed like there was no escape from there. There were signs of life around. Flickering lamps, smoking chimneys, chirping crickets, but I could see none. It was as if they all knew he was in the town and refrained to get under his sight. He suddenly stormed out of a shelter and certainly did not look delighted. Just as he took a fleeting blurred glimpse behind, I took cover. I could almost hear my heart hammering in my ears as I saw his monstrous shadow grow on to the mighty door ahead. With all the courage I had, I went past that door. It seemed like a town that was deluged by the heavy rains. Cold winds bled through as the town was covered in silken layer of fog. My thoughts froze by the stillness around as I saw him row his dinghy into what looked like Templum of Evil. As I stood gazing at the sanctum inside, I shivered as though ice replaced my spine. It looked like a demonic cave burrowed out of a cliff, a labyrinth of twists and turns with enough light just to see inside, but not enough to reveal itself. Inside, there were constant moans and creaks. A musty and putrid odor filled the still air. The walls and ceilings were taken by moles and webs in clusters. Crusty rags hung from the ceiling and lay on the ground. The faint movement showed that there was life underneath them. And I told myself soon they would become his sleepwalkers. He seemed to know his craft. A predator that hunts its prey, keeps it captive for his experiments, and sends them to sleep on his command. As I managed to find my way out, I saw him row his dinghy into what looked like a deeper abyss, to a more monstrous land beyond that. And I did not have the nerve to go, so I decided to retreat.
The art of set design has been alive and well since cinema's earliest days. But with a rising obsession with material culture in the 1980s, a somewhat unintended effect on cinema started to show up in popular filmmaking. Films ranging from Ferris Bueller's Day Off to Back to the Future show how the influence of material culture was affecting the art of cinema in a very particular way. Namely, that set dressing and design was no longer just background noise. As filmmakers became more confident in this field, designing movie sets started to become an almost forensic exercise in character development. Filmmakers were recognizing an increasing drive to reflect your personality through your possessions, to establish who you were with the way you crafted your environment, and reflecting it back to us in a way that helped us in turn build an idea of the characters we were being shown on screen. Though in the 80s, this basically translated to a lot of people in really big houses surrounded by cool, expensive stuff, the core principle of this idea developed as time went on, eventually breaking out of just expressing wealth or material success and rather reflecting more realistically the lives of ordinary people, eventually resulting in some film sets of this ilk becoming as iconic as the TV shows or movies they were part of. Today, I want to explore this tactic in the context of Jim Jarmusch, and especially his 2016 film Paterson. In Paterson, we are presented with only ordinary things, but through Jarmusch's careful framing and emphasis, the audience is given a sense of the kind of visual poetry which is obsessively built over the course of the film. In the first 10 minutes of the film, we are introduced to Paterson's routine, which was repeated over and again for nearly its entire length. Wake up, walk to work, drive a bus, take lunch, come home, talk to Laura, walk the dog, get a beer. But I would like to focus in particular on the visual techniques relating to the objects and environment of the film, which Jarmusch feeds the audience to make his sense of routine come across clearly and strongly. First, the minute Paterson wakes up, the first thing he does is reach across to check his watch, which displays nearly exactly the same time every morning. Even the gesture here is a repeated motion, and the shooting style too, but the beginning of the routine is basically centralized around one thing, Paterson's watch. And this tactic of using an object as a signifier occurs multiple times during his day. And so, instead of breaking Paterson's day down into actions, the viewer also starts mentally breaking it down into objects. For example, watch, coffee pot, notebook, bus, lunchbox, shoes, beer glass. These objects of habit give a sense of the simplicity of the person we're watching, and establish him as a creature of habit. Being shown the same object over and again, the audience builds a familiarity with them, as though it were their own routine. And Jarmusch utilizes this sense of familiarity to build the audience affinity with the character, despite the relatively sparse dialogue. It is this method, as well, which is used to illustrate or foreshadow a change in tone. When the routine shifts, so do the objects, and Paterson's day becomes chaotic. By contrast, the objects which the audience are led to associate with Paterson's wife Laura are always changing, and in this sense, the shifting nature is not designed to create a negative association, but rather to help establish her character. Each day, Laura is seen imbuing different objects with a signature black and white paint treatment, a trait which, once the audience understands the association, can be seen all throughout the house, from the kitchen curtains to the dog's collar. This attention to set detail gives the audience a sense that the environment truly belongs to the characters, and vice versa, and provides them with subtle hints about their lives and relationship. By these methods, Laura and Paterson are set up as complementary opposites, and we're given constant visual clues to help solidify this, whether it be through photographs, a cluttered workspace, or a subtle asymmetry in shared spaces. Objects, too, lead into narrative threads, a concept which is introduced early in the film with a box of matches. This moment in the film is a true testament to the power Jarmusch affords to visual emphasis. Without any context or dialogue, the viewer is simply shown a box of matches, and guided to appreciate it. and the next few minutes is built around an assessment of that moment and the emotional connections the character draws from it. A matchbox is built into a love poem and becomes an emotional centre for that portion of the film. Through similar methods of emphasis, objects are frequently used as the centre of subtle threads of comedy. Take this sequence, for example. As Patterson enters the room and sits down, the shots work in a normal, expected way, moving the emphasis back and forth between Patterson and Laura as they speak to one another, with a medium shot, cut to another medium shot, and back again. But then, as the visual emphasis shifts, the audience is drawn into a sub-dialogue for the scene. The conversation goes on, but the camera now follows Patterson's eye instead of the character interactions. A secondary relationship is established by shifting to shots of set decor, one that is unspoken and yet made abundantly clear from the use of the character's environment. By the end of this relatively simple sequence, the audience has been fed a secondary piece of information, that Patterson mistrusts the dog. And it's moments like this that also undercut the film with a subtle, dry comedy which gives it much of its character. It's through methods like these that Jim Jarmusch finds ways to apply the mundane notion of domestic material culture to his work and utilize it to create unique, funny, and moving moments throughout the film. Unlike many mainstream Hollywood productions which make use of sets and props in obvious, uninteresting, or unconsidered ways, in Patterson, the fabric of the domestic environment becomes the centerpiece of a carefully formulated work of visual poetry in which the ordinary is allowed to shine.
defined as a long passage in a building leading into rooms, the hallway may seem like a soulless, banal in-between space separating rooms in a house or building to create a sense of privacy. Often poorly lit with no particular characteristics, they seem to offer nothing but a series of doors and dead ends. In the world of cinema and games, however, they are an essential element and device for storytelling, indicating directionality towards a destination or goal, a place for encounters, confusion, and fear. They are rarely the location where terror or violence take place, but they are what lead us to these areas, all while ramping up tension and putting us on edge. Though only made commonplace in buildings in the 17th century, hallways are evident since the ancient world, according to Roger Luckhurst, author of the book Corridors, Passages of Modernity. In ancient architecture, temple complexes feature imposing hallway structures with passages that anticipate an approaching godly encounter, where their designs are diffused with mythic resonances of the labyrinth, conjuring up images of lost souls and wandering monsters. Hallways are perfect in films that wish to elicit fear and anxiousness from the audience. Characters in these films seem to always be vulnerable in this space, their backs often exposed to the ambiguous, their line of sight and field of vision narrowed to the width of the space determined by the flanking walls, with each corner and shadow hiding a potential threat. In horror movies, hallways further emphasize the feeling of entrapment, especially with their length. With fewer places to run away, there's either forwards or backwards, because every door the character passes seems to be inevitably locked despite the hopes of the viewer. In the world of video games, the game Control, for example, makes its hallways a world of unknown possibilities. Players are occasionally teleported to a place of power known as the Ocean View Motel. It connects various dimensions and unknown locations. Through a series of puzzles, the character traverses the empty hallways to find a solution to open the correct door to reach places in the character's mind, all the while fearing what they might encounter if they open the wrong door or make the wrong turn. In addition to isolating and disorienting a player, hallways may also inflict some form of assault. In the game Metal Gear Solid, the main character Snake makes his way through a painfully long corridor rigged with microwaves. The shallow depth of field and long focal length of the camera in this part of the game increase the perceived depth of the space, making the journey to the other side of the room seem like an unreachable goal. Furthermore, the slower camera movement accentuates the immense pain the character endures through his sheer force of will against the tortuous hallway. The game PT plays with our fundamental belief that structurally and metaphorically, hallways always have an end. But in the search for this end, it is to the player's horrific realization that the nightmares they are experiencing is a never-ending loop of corridors and 90-degree turns. Similarly, in games like Resident Evil, Luckhurst also points out that there is an escalation in the degree of dread in anticipation that comes with every door that the player passes. If the hallways are simply a means of transit, each door and threshold that the player walks past becomes an opportunity for another terrifying encounter. Film directors and game developers have long recognized the ingrained fear of these spaces, exploiting their parallel lines, forced focal points, and physical containment of characters to create an endless stream of scenarios and obstacles in their films and video games. Hallways are long, narrow, claustrophobic, and made primarily for transit. And yet sometimes, our most sensitive encounters play out in this zone of anticipatory fear, with our doors and only means of escape closed behind us.